What if the reason you suffer so deeply is not because life is against you, but because you are holding too tightly to things that were never meant to stay? Tonight, somewhere in the world, someone is lying awake at 2 a.m., staring into the darkness, wondering why they still feel empty after doing everything right. They worked hard. They loved deeply. They chased success. They tried to become the version of themselves the world would admire. And yet, beneath the noise of their busy life, there is a quiet ache they cannot explain. Maybe that person is you. There is a kind of exhaustion that sleep cannot fix. It is the exhaustion of constantly pretending to be okay. The exhaustion of overthinking every conversation. The exhaustion of trying to control what people think of you. The exhaustion of fearing that everything you love could disappear overnight. Most people never say it out loud, but deep inside they are terrified. Terrified of being abandoned. Terrified of failing. Terrified of ending up alone. Terrified that life may never become what they hoped it would be. And so they chase harder. More money, more validation, more attention, more certainty. But strangely, the more they chase peace, the further peace seems to run away. In the heart of Kyoto, beneath cold autumn rain and glowing lanterns, a young man named Daniel walked through narrow streets crowded with strangers. To the outside world, he looked successful. He had a respected career in San Francisco, a good income, friends who admired him, and a future many people would envy. But inside, his mind was collapsing. Every morning began with anxiety. Every night ended with overthinking. He checked his phone obsessively, comparing his life to people online who seemed happier, wealthier, more loved, more fulfilled. And slowly, without realizing it, Daniel had become a prisoner of his own mind. That is the tragedy of modern life. People have never been more connected, yet never felt more alone. Never had more entertainment, yet felt more emotionally numb. Never had more ways to communicate, yet struggled so deeply to feel understood. As rain poured softly onto the stone streets, Daniel suddenly noticed an old monk sitting alone beside a quiet temple garden. While the entire city rushed around him, the monk remained completely still, holding a small cup of tea as if time itself had stopped moving. Something about him felt unsettling. Not because he looked powerful, but because he looked peaceful. A kind of peace Daniel had not felt in years. Unable to resist, Daniel approached him and asked the question that had secretly been haunting him for most of his life. How do I stop my mind from suffering? The monk looked at him quietly for a long moment before speaking. You suffer, he said softly, because you believe life must happen according to your plans in order for you to be at peace. Daniel stood frozen, because deep down he knew it was true, and what the monk said next would completely change the course of his life forever. But before we continue this journey together, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and support our community. These stories are created to help you heal, reflect, and reconnect with the peace that modern life often steals from us. Your support truly helps us continue creating more meaningful journeys like this one. Now, I want to ask you something honestly. Which causes more suffering in life? A. Losing something you love. B. Living in constant fear of losing it. Comment A or B below. I'm truly curious to see how many people understand the hidden difference between the two. The next morning, Daniel could not stop thinking about the monk's words. You suffer because you believe life must happen according to your plans in order for you to be at peace. Those words followed him through the crowded streets of Kyoto, like a quiet echo inside his chest. For years, Daniel had blamed his suffering on failed relationships, stress, uncertainty, and disappointment. But now, for the first time, he began wondering if the true source of his pain was something much deeper. What if suffering was not caused by losing things, but by desperately trying to hold on to things that were never permanent to begin with? A few days later, Daniel left Japan and traveled to Bangkok. The city pulsed with life. Motorcycles raced through narrow streets. Golden temples shimmered beneath the heat of the afternoon sun. Music, laughter, incense, and chaos blended together like one endless current moving through the city. And yet, despite all the noise around him, Daniel still felt strangely hollow inside. One evening, while wandering through a crowded night market beside the Chao Phraya River, he saw the monk again. The old man stood quietly near the water, holding a delicate paper lantern glowing softly in the darkness. Its golden light flickered gently against the moving river, fragile and beautiful at the same time. Daniel stared at it silently. "It's beautiful," he finally said. The monk smiled softly. "My teacher gave it to me many years ago. There was something sacred in the way he held it, not possessive, not fearful, simply appreciative." As they walked together through the market, heavy winds suddenly swept through the streets. Vendors rushed to secure their tables while storm clouds gathered above the city. Within moments, rain crashed down violently from the sky. Then it happened. A powerful gust of wind tore the lantern from the monk's hands. The thin paper struck the wet ground and collapsed instantly. The small flame flickered once, then disappeared into darkness. Daniel's heart sank. He expected panic, sadness, anger. But the monk simply looked down at the ruined lantern quietly, almost tenderly, before saying something Daniel would never forget. The lantern began disappearing the moment it was lit. For a moment, the noise of the city seemed to vanish completely. Humans become attached to things because they fear impermanence. They cling to relationships because they fear loneliness. They cling to youth because they fear aging. They cling to success because they fear insignificance. They cling to people because they fear being forgotten. But attachment creates a hidden prison. Because the moment we become emotionally dependent on something temporary, fear enters the heart. Fear of losing it. Fear of change. Fear of endings. And slowly, instead of enjoying life, people begin guarding life anxiously. The monk and Daniel stood beneath a small roof while rain poured heavily around them. Most people never truly experience the present moment, the monk said softly, because they are too busy worrying about how to keep it from disappearing. Daniel felt those words deeply. How many beautiful moments had he ruined by fearing their ending before they were even over? How many relationships had become heavy because of his need for reassurance? How many sleepless nights had he spent trying to control things beyond his power? The monk lit a small candle nearby and watched the flame carefully. "Impermanence is not cruel," he said. "It is what makes life precious." Daniel stared at the flickering light. For the first time, he began understanding something most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Nothing in this world was ever promised to stay forever. And perhaps true peace begins the moment we stop asking life to remain unchanged. Because detachment does not mean loving less. It means loving fully. While understanding that everything, like the lantern, was always meant to dance briefly in the dark before returning to silence. When Daniel returned to the United States, he believed the hardest part of his journey was over. He thought understanding attachment would immediately bring peace. He thought awareness alone would silence the fear inside him. But life has a strange way of testing people precisely when they believe they are finally beginning to heal. Only a few weeks after returning to San Francisco, Daniel received a message that shattered him emotionally. The woman he once imagined building a future with had moved on. Just like that. No dramatic ending, no final explanation, no perfect closure, only silence. For days, Daniel could barely think clearly. His mind replayed old memories endlessly like a film refusing to stop. Every small detail became torture. He questioned himself constantly. What did I do wrong? Why wasn't I enough? Could I have changed the outcome? The deeper his thoughts spiraled, the heavier his suffering became. One night, unable to bear the noise inside his own mind any longer, Daniel drove alone to Santa Monica. Storm clouds covered the sky, while violent waves crashed against the shore with terrifying force. The ocean looked angry, restless, uncontrollable. Daniel stood near the water, soaking in cold rain, feeling as though his entire life was collapsing beneath the weight of emotions he could no longer suppress. And then, through the storm, he saw the monk once again. The old man stood calmly near the shoreline, his robes moving softly in the wind while the ocean roared behind him. "You are fighting reality," the monk said quietly. Daniel looked at him with frustration in his eyes. "How do I not fight this?" he asked. "How do I accept losing someone I loved?" The monk did not answer immediately. Instead, he pointed toward the ocean. A massive wave rose violently in the distance before crashing against the shore. "You cannot stop the wave from coming," he said, "but you can stop drowning beneath it." Those words pierced something deep inside Daniel. Humans suffer not only because painful things happen. They suffer because they refuse to accept that painful things are part of life itself. People resist heartbreak, resist endings, resist uncertainty, resist change. And the more they resist, the more exhausted they become. Daniel realized that ever since the relationship ended, he had been emotionally arguing with reality. This shouldn't have happened. She should still be here. Life was supposed to go differently. But reality does not change because the heart refuses to accept it. The monk bent down and picked up a handful of ocean water. "Try to hold this," he said. Daniel closed his hand tightly around the water. Within seconds, it slipped through his fingers completely. "The tighter you grip," the monk whispered, "the faster life escapes you." Rain continued pouring across the beach, while the ocean roared endlessly into the night. Modern society teaches people to avoid pain at all costs. The moment sadness appears, people distract themselves immediately. They scroll endlessly through social media. They overwork. They seek validation. They pretend to be okay because vulnerability feels uncomfortable. But buried emotions do not disappear. They remain hidden beneath the surface, quietly shaping every thought, reaction, and fear. The monk explained that acceptance is not surrendering to hopelessness. Acceptance means seeing clearly. It means acknowledging, "This hurts. This changed me. This is real." And from that honesty, healing begins. Daniel looked out toward the endless dark horizon. For the first time, he stopped asking life to reverse what had already happened. And strangely, the moment he stopped resisting the pain began loosening its grip on him. The storm slowly began moving away from the shore. Above the ocean, a faint opening appeared between the clouds, where moonlight reflected softly against the water. The ocean survives every storm because it never asks the storm to stay away, the monk said quietly. Daniel closed his eyes and listened to the waves. Still powerful, still unpredictable, still moving. just like life. And for the first time, instead of fighting the current, he allowed himself to simply feel it pass through him. After the storm in Santa Monica, something inside Daniel became quieter. Not happier, not fully healed, but quieter. For the first time in years, he stopped trying to force immediate answers out of life. He no longer woke up every morning obsessing over how to fix the future. Yet, despite the calm slowly growing within him, there was still one fear he could not completely release. The fear that life was passing him by. That fear followed him all the way to Tuscany. The countryside looked almost unreal at sunrise. Endless hills rolled beneath golden light, while vineyards and olive groves stretched toward the horizon like paintings untouched by time. Everything there seemed to move slower. People spoke slower, walked slower. Even silence felt alive. Daniel rented a small room near Siena, hoping distance from the noise of his old life would bring clarity. One afternoon, while wandering through a field lined with olive trees, he met an elderly farmer named Matteo. The man worked quietly beneath the heat of the afternoon sun, carefully tending trees that looked older than entire generations. "You've done this your whole life?" Daniel asked. Matteo smiled softly. "And the trees are still teaching me patience." For several days, Daniel helped him harvest olives and repair old wooden fences. What surprised him most was the farmer's complete lack of urgency. There was no anxiety in him, no desperation, no constant need to hurry toward the next thing. One evening, heavy clouds gathered suddenly across the Tuscan hills. Strong winds swept through the fields, threatening the season's harvest. Daniel looked at the sky nervously. "If the storm ruins the crops," he asked, "won't you lose everything?" Matteo looked toward the olive trees, swaying gently in the wind. Then he said something Daniel would carry with him forever. "The tree does not panic during winter because it trusts spring will return." Daniel fell silent. Modern life has conditioned people to believe that every delay is failure. If love does not arrive quickly enough, they feel unwanted. If success takes too long, they feel inadequate. If healing is slow, they think something is wrong with them. People compare timelines constantly. By a certain age, I should have this. I should be married by now. I should already know my purpose. I should be further ahead. And slowly, comparison turns life into a race no one ever truly wins. Matteo explained that nature never rushes, yet everything arrives exactly when it is meant to. Olive trees spend years developing roots before producing fruit. During that time, from the outside, it appears as though nothing is happening. But underground, unseen growth is quietly taking place. Humans often abandon their lives during this invisible season. They give up too soon, force relationships too quickly, settle out of loneliness, destroy their peace trying to control timing. But some things cannot bloom before their season arrives. As they sat together, watching the storm move across the hills, Matteo poured 2 cups of tea. "When I was younger," he admitted quietly, "I chased many things that were never truly meant for me. I exhausted myself trying to force doors open that life kept closing." Daniel listened carefully. "But eventually," Matteo continued, "I realized something important. What belongs to you will never require you to betray your peace in order to keep it." The wind moved softly through the olive trees around them. In that moment, Daniel realized how much of his suffering had come from believing he was behind in life. But maybe life was not rejecting him. Maybe life was preparing him, preparing his heart, preparing his spirit, preparing him to receive things he was once too wounded to hold properly. As the last light faded across the Tuscan hills, Daniel looked out at the endless fields and felt something unfamiliar settle inside him. Trust. Not because he suddenly knew what the future would bring, but because he finally understood that not everything meaningful arrives quickly. Some of the most beautiful things in life grow slowly, silently, and unseen, until one day, without warning, they finally bloom. By the time Daniel left Tuscany, he had begun understanding something most people spend their entire lives resisting. Life cannot be forced into obedience. Still, understanding this truth intellectually was very different from living it emotionally. Deep inside, Daniel still carried an old habit that had shaped most of his life: the need to control outcomes before they had the chance to hurt him. Control had once made him feel safe. If he planned carefully enough, maybe nothing would fall apart. If he anticipated every problem, maybe he could avoid pain. If he worked hard enough, loved correctly enough, prepared thoroughly enough, perhaps life would finally become predictable. But life had repeatedly shown him otherwise. Months later, Daniel traveled to Oregon, hoping the quiet forests would help clear his mind. Towering pine trees stretched endlessly beneath gray skies, while cold mist drifted through the mountains like smoke. Everything felt ancient there, untouched by the urgency of modern life. One morning, while hiking alone near Crater Lake, Daniel noticed movement on a low branch beside the trail. A butterfly was struggling violently inside its cocoon. Its tiny body pushed desperately against the narrow opening, trembling with effort. Daniel stopped immediately. For several minutes he watched the creature struggle, feeling uncomfortable as he witnessed its suffering. Instinctively, he reached down and carefully tore open part of the cocoon to help it escape. The butterfly slowly emerged. At first, Daniel smiled with relief, but moments later, his expression changed. The butterfly's wings remained weak and shriveled. It crawled helplessly across the branch, unable to fly. "You tried to save it from the very thing it needed." Startled, Daniel turned and saw a woman standing nearby, holding a basket of herbs. Her name was Evelyn, a meditation teacher who lived near the mountains. "The struggle strengthens the wings," she explained gently. "Without it, the butterfly cannot survive." Daniel looked down at the fragile creature in silence. Those words reached far beyond the butterfly. Humans spend enormous energy trying to escape discomfort. They rush healing, force relationships, demand certainty, avoid loneliness, fear failure, fear rejection, fear not knowing what comes next. Modern society has become obsessed with control. People plan every detail of their future while secretly falling apart inside. They track productivity, optimize schedules, curate online identities, and measure their worth through achievements. But beneath all of it often lies the same hidden fear. If I lose control, everything will collapse. The problem is that control is mostly an illusion. No one can fully control who stays, who leaves, how life changes, when opportunities arrive, or what tomorrow brings. And the harder people try to dominate uncertainty, the more anxious they become. Daniel admitted quietly, "I think most of my life has been spent trying to prevent suffering before it happens." Evelyn smiled sadly. "And has it made you peaceful?" He looked away. No. In truth, the attempt to control life had exhausted him more than uncertainty itself ever had. Overthinking became a prison. Perfectionism became fear disguised as ambition. Even love became heavy when mixed with the need for reassurance and guarantees. Evelyn invited Daniel to sit beside the lake as evening settled across the forest. "No tree forces itself to grow faster," she said softly. "No season arrives before its time. Nature trusts its own unfolding. Humans are the only ones who constantly fight the rhythm of life." Daniel listened to the wind moving through the trees. For the first time, he realized how much suffering came not from life itself, but from his resistance to life's unpredictability. The butterfly had not needed rescue. It needed transformation. And perhaps humans are the same. Perhaps some seasons of struggle are not punishments. Perhaps uncertainty is not the enemy. Perhaps discomfort is quietly shaping the soul in ways comfort never could. As darkness slowly covered the forest, Daniel watched the butterfly resting motionless on the branch, its wings still fragile, still unfinished, still becoming. And for the first time in a very long while, Daniel allowed himself to stop forcing answers. He simply sat there in the silence, trusting that some things unfold only when they are ready. Evelyn invited Daniel to stay for several days at the meditation retreat, hidden deep within the mountains of Oregon. At first, he almost refused. The idea of silence made him uncomfortable, not because silence was empty, but because silence removed every distraction he normally used to escape himself. The retreat sat beside a vast mountain lake surrounded by pine trees and cold morning fog. There was no traffic noise, no television, no endless notifications buzzing every few minutes. Phones were placed away during most of the day, and conversations were kept minimal. For someone who had spent years living inside constant mental stimulation, the stillness felt almost unbearable. The first night, Daniel could barely sleep. Without distractions, his thoughts became louder than ever. Memories resurfaced. Regrets returned. Old fears he thought he had buried quietly rose back into consciousness. He realized something deeply unsettling. Most of his life had been spent running from his own mind. Modern life gives people endless ways to avoid themselves. The moment discomfort appears, they reach for something. Their phone, music, work, social media, entertainment, noise, anything to avoid sitting quietly with their own thoughts. But eventually, every distraction fades, and when it does, a person is finally left alone with themselves. The next morning, before sunrise, Evelyn guided Daniel to the edge of the lake. Cold mist hovered above the water, while the mountains reflected faintly against the still surface. "My mind never stops," Daniel admitted quietly. "Even when everything around me is peaceful, I still feel restless inside." Evelyn pointed toward the lake. Strong wind had disturbed the water during the night, leaving ripples moving endlessly across the surface. "Can the lake reflect clearly while the water is constantly moving?" she asked. Daniel shook his head. "No, and the mind is no different." They sat together in silence as dawn slowly illuminated the mountains. Evelyn explained that meditation is often misunderstood. Many people believe meditation means forcing the mind to become empty. But the harder people try to suppress thoughts, the more trapped they become by them. Meditation is not about controlling the mind. It is about observing it without becoming consumed by it. Thoughts come. Thoughts go. Emotions rise. Emotions fade, like clouds moving across the sky. For the first time in his life, Daniel began practicing true stillness. At first, it felt impossible. The moment he closed his eyes, his mind flooded with noise, unfinished conversations, future worries, self-criticism, fear, loneliness. Each time this happened, Evelyn would gently remind him, "Return to your breath." Again and again, Daniel returned, not perfectly, not peacefully, but honestly. Slowly, something inside him began changing. He started noticing how much suffering came not from life itself, but from the stories his mind constantly created about life. Fear of what might happen. Fear of what already happened. Fear of losing control. Fear of not being enough. The mind had become a machine, endlessly generating suffering through attachment to past and future. But during meditation, Daniel experienced rare moments where none of those thoughts existed. Only breath, only stillness, only now. One evening, Evelyn asked everyone at the retreat to sit silently beside the lake during sunset without speaking or touching their phones. At first, Daniel felt restless. His mind searched desperately for stimulation. But as darkness slowly settled across the mountains, something unexpected happened. The silence stopped feeling threatening. It began feeling peaceful. For the first time in years, he experienced a moment where he was not chasing anything. Not success, not validation, not answers, not escape. Just presence. As the final light faded across the water, the lake became completely still, reflecting the stars with perfect clarity. And in that moment, Daniel understood something profound. Peace is not something we create. It is something that appears naturally when the mind finally stops fighting itself. After leaving the retreat in Oregon, Daniel noticed that the world around him had not changed nearly as much as his relationship with it had. The same uncertainties still existed. The future was still unknown. Pain still visited him, sometimes without warning. But something inside him no longer reacted with the same desperation. For years, Daniel believed peace would come when life finally became stable, when everything was certain, when nobody left, when failure was impossible, when the future felt secure. But now he was beginning to understand a difficult truth. Life was never designed to become completely predictable. And perhaps the deepest suffering comes from demanding permanence from a world built entirely on change. Months later, Daniel traveled alone to Ireland. He spent several days near the cliffs of County Clare, where the Atlantic Ocean crashed endlessly against black stone beneath enormous grey skies. The landscape felt ancient, almost sacred, as though the cliffs themselves had witnessed generations of human fear, loss, hope, and longing. One evening, thick fog rolled across the coastline, while cold rain began falling heavily. Daniel continued hiking despite the weather, lost in thought. Lately, he had been questioning who he truly was without all the identities he once clung to. Without constant achievement, without validation, without needing to prove himself. Who was he? That question unsettled him more than he expected. As he moved carefully along the narrow cliffside trail, his foot suddenly slipped on the wet ground. Within seconds, his body slid dangerously toward the edge. Instinctively, Daniel grabbed onto a twisted tree branch growing from the side of the cliff. His heart pounded violently. Below him, darkness swallowed the crashing ocean beneath the fog. Rain soaked his hands, while fear tightened every muscle in his body. He held on to the branch desperately, terrified that letting go would destroy him. Minutes passed. Then, through the storm, a familiar voice emerged calmly above him. "Daniel." He looked up and saw the monk standing near the edge of the cliff, his figure barely visible through the fog. "I can't let go," Daniel shouted. "I'll fall." The monk remained completely calm. "Look beneath you." Daniel hesitated. Slowly, trembling, he glanced downward. Just below him, hidden by panic and darkness, was a wide stone ledge only a few feet beneath his body. The ground had been there the entire time. Carefully, Daniel released the branch and dropped safely onto the ledge below. The moment his feet touched solid ground, overwhelming emotion rushed through him. Relief, exhaustion, freedom. The monk climbed down beside him and sat quietly while waves crashed violently below the cliffs. "This is how most people live," he said softly, "clinging to suffering because they are afraid of the unknown beneath it." Daniel stared silently at the ocean. How many people stay inside relationships that slowly destroy them because loneliness feels more frightening? How many continue pretending to be someone they are not because authenticity risks rejection? How many hold on to old versions of themselves long after their soul has outgrown them? Humans often confuse attachment with safety, but sometimes the very thing people cling to is what keeps them trapped. The monk explained that fear narrows perception. When people panic, they stop seeing clearly. They assume uncertainty means disaster. They imagine that letting go will destroy them. But often, letting go simply reveals the ground that was waiting beneath them all along. The ocean roared endlessly below. "Look at the waves," the monk said. "They survive because they never resist movement. The moment water stops flowing, it becomes stagnant." Daniel listened quietly. For most of his life, he had tried to control every outcome because he believed uncertainty was dangerous. But standing there on the cliffs, he realized something profound. The fear of letting go had exhausted him far more than change itself ever had. And perhaps freedom was never about controlling life. Perhaps freedom begins the moment we finally trust ourselves enough to release what no longer belongs in our hands. When Daniel returned to San Francisco after Ireland, people around him began noticing subtle changes in him. He no longer rushed through conversations. He listened more carefully. He reacted less impulsively. There was a quietness in him now that had not existed before. But despite everything he had learned throughout his journey, there was still one wound he had not fully healed: the way he saw himself. Late at night, old memories still surfaced unexpectedly. Moments he regretted, people he hurt unintentionally, years wasted chasing approval, decisions made from fear instead of wisdom. Even after learning acceptance, Daniel still carried a hidden belief deep inside himself. I should have done better. I should have known better. I should already be healed by now. And without realizing it, He continued punishing himself internally, long after life had already moved forward. One cold evening, searching for clarity once again, Daniel visited a small Buddhist temple hidden among cedar trees outside the city. The temple was quiet, except for the faint sound of wind moving through hanging bells near the entrance. Inside, he met an elderly nun named Sunhee, arranging flowers beside a candlelit altar. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then, Daniel finally whispered the truth he had avoided saying out loud for years. "I don't know how to forgive myself." Sunhee looked at him gently, as though she had heard those words from countless suffering hearts before his. Without speaking, she handed him a ceramic bowl repaired with delicate lines of gold running through its cracks. Daniel studied it carefully. "It's broken," he said quietly. "Yes," she replied, "and still beautiful." She explained the Japanese art of kintsugi, the practice of repairing broken pottery with gold instead of hiding the damage. "The cracks are not something to be ashamed of," she said softly. "They become part of the story." Those words struck something deep inside Daniel. Most people spend their entire lives hiding their wounds. They hide sadness behind productivity, hide loneliness behind social media smiles, hide insecurity behind perfectionism, hide exhaustion behind constant achievement. Modern society rewards appearance more than honesty. People are taught to present polished versions of themselves while silently carrying unbearable emotional weight underneath. And often, the person they are cruelest to is themselves. Daniel realized how harshly he had spoken to himself for years. He forgave others more easily than he forgave himself. He offered compassion to strangers while denying it to his own heart. Every mistake became proof he was failing. Every setback became evidence he was not enough. But suffering grows heavier when compassion is absent. Sunhee invited Daniel to sit beside the altar and close his eyes. "Place your hand over your heart," she said gently, "and listen carefully to how you speak to yourself." At first, Daniel heard only criticism, fear, disappointment, pressure. Then Sunhee spoke softly. "You cannot heal through self-hatred." Tears slowly filled Daniel's eyes. For so long, he believed growth required constant self-judgment. He thought being hard on himself would somehow make him stronger. But in truth, it had only made him exhausted. The nun explained that compassion is not weakness. Compassion is the courage to remain gentle in a world that constantly teaches people to harden themselves. It means allowing yourself to be human, to make mistakes, to grow slowly, to begin again without shame. Before Daniel left the temple, Sunhee placed a small stone into his hand. "Imagine carrying this every day for 10 years, she said. After several minutes, the weight became uncomfortable. "This is what resentment does to the heart," she whispered. "Especially resentment toward yourself." As Daniel stepped outside into the cold night air, something inside him finally softened. Not because his past disappeared, but because he no longer believed his brokenness made him unworthy of peace. For the first time in years, he understood something profoundly healing. A scar does not mean life destroyed you. Sometimes it means life repaired you in a way that made your soul more compassionate, more awake, and more beautiful than before. Almost a year had passed since Daniel first wandered through the rain-soaked streets of Kyoto, carrying a heart heavy with fear, exhaustion, and quiet loneliness. Looking back now, he barely recognized the person he used to be. Not because his life had become perfect, but because his relationship with life had changed completely. The anxiety that once controlled him no longer dictated every decision. The fear of uncertainty no longer felt unbearable. The desperate need to hold on to everything had slowly loosened its grip on his heart. Life still brought challenges. Some days still hurt. Some nights still felt uncertain. But suffering no longer consumed him the way it once had. One early morning in San Francisco, Daniel stood quietly beside his apartment window, watching sunlight slowly rise over the city. Cars moved below. People hurried toward work. Phones glowed in strangers' hands as another restless day began. For a moment, he saw his old self in all of them, always rushing, always chasing, always believing peace existed somewhere in the future. I'll finally be happy when. I'll finally relax after. I'll finally feel worthy once. But peace built on conditions is fragile, because life never stops changing. There will always be another goal, another uncertainty, another fear waiting in the distance. And if happiness depends on controlling every circumstance, peace will always remain temporary. That morning, Daniel received a handwritten letter slipped beneath his apartment door. There was no return address. Inside was a single sentence written carefully across the page. When the mind stops chasing, the soul remembers how to breathe. At the bottom was the name of a city, Prague. Several months later, Daniel found himself walking beside the monk once again through the quiet streets of Prague before sunrise. The city was almost completely silent. Golden light touched the rooftops, while cold air moved gently through ancient stone alleyways. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Daniel asked the question that had quietly followed him throughout his entire journey. When does a person finally reach peace? The monk smiled softly as they continued walking. People think peace is a destination, he said. But peace is the way you move through life. Daniel listened carefully. For most of his life, he had treated inner peace like an achievement waiting somewhere in the future. Something to unlock after enough success, enough healing, enough certainty. But now he understood something deeper. Peace is not found in controlling life. Peace is found in how gently you hold it. It is found in releasing what no longer belongs to you, in accepting what cannot be changed, in trusting timing you do not yet understand, in sitting quietly with yourself without needing constant distraction, in forgiving yourself for being human. The monk explained that wisdom is not built through one moment of enlightenment. It is built daily, in ordinary moments, in how you respond to disappointment, in how you speak to yourself when nobody else is listening, in how you treat people who cannot offer you anything in return, in whether you choose fear or presence. Daniel began noticing that true transformation happens quietly, like roots growing beneath the earth unseen, like sunrise arriving gradually over the horizon, like the lake in Oregon becoming still after the wind disappears. Real healing is rarely dramatic. It happens slowly through awareness repeated over and over again. Some days, fear still returned. Some days, attachment resurfaced. Some days, old wounds reopened unexpectedly. And that was okay, because healing was never about becoming perfect. It was about becoming conscious. As they crossed an old stone bridge overlooking the river, the monk finally stopped walking. "What have you learned?" he asked. Daniel looked out at the water, moving endlessly beneath the morning light. Then he answered quietly, "I learned that what is truly meant for me does not need to be forced, and what leaves was never mine to keep forever." The monk smiled, and in that moment, Daniel finally understood. Life had never been trying to punish him. It had been teaching him how to let go, how to trust, how to live. And perhaps that is the greatest freedom any person can ever discover, to stop chasing life so desperately, and finally allow yourself to receive it. Daniel's journey was never really about traveling across Kyoto, Bangkok, Tuscany, Oregon, Ireland, or Prague. It was about traveling inward. At the beginning of the story, Daniel was like so many people in today's world, exhausted, anxious, emotionally overwhelmed, and secretly afraid that life was slipping out of his control. He believed peace would come if he could just hold everything together perfectly. If he succeeded enough, if people stayed, if the future unfolded according to his plans. But life slowly taught him a deeper truth. The more tightly he tried to hold on to life, the more suffering he created for himself. Through the broken lantern in Bangkok, he learned that everything beautiful is temporary, and that attachment often turns love into fear. Through the crashing waves in Santa Monica, he discovered that resisting reality only deepens pain. In Tuscany, The olive trees taught him that life unfolds in seasons, and that what is truly meant for us arrives in its own time. In Oregon, the butterfly revealed that struggle is not always punishment. Sometimes it is preparation. Beside the still lake in the mountains, he realized that peace does not come from controlling thoughts, but from observing them without becoming trapped inside them. On the cliffs of Ireland, he finally understood that fear often keeps us clinging to things long after they stop serving our soul. And through Sun He's wisdom in San Francisco, he learned perhaps the hardest lesson of all. Compassion must also be given to ourselves. By the end of his journey, Daniel's life had not become perfect, but his heart had changed. And that is the real transformation. Because peace does not come from eliminating uncertainty. It comes from learning how to walk through uncertainty without losing yourself. Life will still bring endings. People will still leave. Plans will still change. Pain will still visit us sometimes. But suffering becomes lighter when we stop demanding permanence from a world that was always meant to change. That is the deeper lesson hidden inside this entire story. What is truly meant for you will never require you to betray your peace in order to keep it. And perhaps many people listening to this right now needed to hear that. Maybe you are holding on to someone who no longer chooses you. Maybe you are forcing a future that no longer aligns with your spirit. Maybe you are exhausted from trying to control every detail of your life because you are terrified of uncertainty. But healing begins the moment you stop fighting reality and start trusting life a little more deeply. Not passively, not hopelessly, but peacefully. Start small. Spend a few minutes each day in silence. Put your phone away sometimes and listen to your own thoughts. Stop chasing validation from people who cannot see your worth. Learn to let moments exist without fearing their ending. And most importantly, speak to yourself with the same compassion you offer others. Because your soul was never meant to live in constant fear. Now I want to ask you something honestly. Which brings more peace in life? Controlling everything around you. Trusting that life will unfold the way it's meant to. Comment A or B below. And if this story resonated with you in any way, share your thoughts and experiences in the comments as well. Have you ever gone through a painful moment that later revealed itself as a hidden blessing? Or are you currently learning how to let go of something difficult? Your story may help someone else feel less alone. And if you enjoy these kinds of healing journeys and Buddhist wisdom stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and support our community. Your support truly inspires us to continue creating more meaningful stories to help people find peace in a chaotic world.